The date is August the 5th, 1983. This is Jeff LePage, and I'll be interviewing John Cousins of Bloomfield, PEI.
Knowing only, of course, the history of the Irish in my part of the country, the Irish along Lot 7 came there in 1820 or 1821. I'm not sure of the exact year, but if you want to check the year that George the IV was crowned King of England, the coronation. The coronation day was the day that a ship, now this is mentioned in the Advocate Review, because I did an article in the Advocate Review on the early settlers in Lot 7, but anyway, a ship called the brig Martin left a port somewhere in the west or southwest of Ireland. There is a family tradition connected with this. There were a family of O'Halloran's on board that ship, and the story came down through the O'Halloran families for the last 160 years or so about when the ship was leaving the harbor, terrible noise, racket struck up and cannons firing off and so on, and there was some the women were terrified. They thought the ship was being attacked, and what it was a salute to the king who was being crowned that day. Do you see? Terrified them to death. But anyway, that was the day of the coronation of George IV. Now I haven't checked into it too deeply. I've checked two books, and they're both conflicting as to what date that was and what year it was. I think it was 1820, but it may have been 21. Certainly he came to the throne in 20. Whether the official coronation was that year or not, I don't know. King George III died in 1820, and his son George IV took over. Well, okay, so they came up there, these Irish people, and the O'Hallorans were the first people along that shore. Lot 7 is in a triangular shape with the long edge of it running along the shore from the village of Campbellton to what is now West Cape. It stretches for 15 miles, that side of the triangle. The O'Hallorans settled right at the north end. The very first farm along the Lot 7 line was the O'Halloran farm, a little hill looking over a cove there at Campbellton. And by the way, that line, that Lot 7 line, it's not the line with Lot 6, it's the line with Lot 4, because of the way the triangle runs, if you see what I mean. Well, they were there, and it wasn't too long before there were other families, Daltons, Rileys, Howards, Doyles, Butlers, Griffins, a man by the name of Brazel, which is originally, I'm sure, not Irish, but maybe every nationality has strange names in it, out of place. Like an Irish name you'll run across up west is Costello. Costello is as Spanish or Italian as you're going to get. But these people are Irish, and there's no arguing that. Whether there was a Spaniard settled in Ireland 400 years ago, God only knows, but you know, these names are funny. Just like LePage in England. It's originally a Norman name. My own name is, according to family tradition, is Cousins came from Normandy also, but not at the time of William the Conqueror, which was 1066. They came later in the 1500s over to England. Well, anyway, those people came there, those Irish families, and they were interesting people. You know, I've gone back. There was surprisingly, over the last 160 years that there were there, surprisingly very little crime along that coast. amongst the Irish anyway. I suppose there was petty things went on, but they were generally a sort of a law-abiding, peace-loving people. They bought the first settlers there. The lot was owned by Montgomerys, and Montgomerys were an interesting type of landowner. They were willing to sell land. Now, if you make a study of the land holding system here on the island, what they call the land question, which is extremely complicated, and you could write 15 books about it. The island was owned by just a few men. Well, the problem was is that land was in their hands, and they wouldn't sell. What their intention was to build up a bunch, a group, a collection of tenants on their property. That ensured you that you were going to be wealthy, and your children and grandchildren were going to be wealthy. All that rent coming in. So they wanted to rent rather than to sell outright. But the Montgomerys were somewhat different, and they sold. Whether they thought their land was never going to be worth anything and they were just going to get rid of the hassle of it, I don't know. But they sold to these first farmers, and however, within about 20 years, 18 or 20 years, I think it was 1839, the land they hadn't sold, which was, heavens, 9/10 of the lot, I suppose. They had sold a few farms along the shore. They sold the whole works to another landowner who would not sell. So that land from 1840 through 1875 or thereabouts was in the hands of Stewarts of Strathgartney out here. They owned Lot 7. There were interesting people, among them very, very few landowners who ever resided on the island. And in that sense, they were good, because most of these guys were absentee. But they wouldn't sell, and it was pretty good land along the shore, and in along the O'Leary Road. It's as good a farmland as you get any place on the island. So the Stewarts wouldn't sell, and it created bad feelings, because you would have a man who had a bunch of sons. If he settled there in 1820 or 25, by 1845, he would have young fellows, yes, in 1840 almost, he would have young fellows ready to farm. I mean, that's what they did. They didn't do anything else in Lot 7 or the rest of the place. And so the Irish were sort of mad because those sons couldn't buy land. Their fathers had bought land from the previous landowners, but they couldn't. So anyway, it was a lot of discussion, a lot of argument, a lot of bad feelings over the landowners, and a lot of meetings through the 1860s, and eventually the land was sold to small farmers when the island government finally forced them. Now, where were they from, these Irish people? Well, I'll give you a few. The Rileys, who came, I think, in 1826, Riley family, and they're still up there, lots of them, Lot 7. And they came in 1826, and they came from Kerry, and I don't exactly know what area, but the Daltons came from the parish of Ballyhigh in Kerry. The Doyles came from Wexford. The Howards came from Wexford. The O'Hallerons came from Tralee, which I guess is in Kerry. You could check that to the town or village of Tralee. It's all south. Most of these people came from 4 counties: Cork, Kerry, Waterford, and Wexford. The first school teacher who came there in 1939, he had taught 2 or 3 other places, maybe more than that, on the island through the 1830s, was from Cork. I think he may have known some of those, some of the Irish families up there, because he mentions, his name was J.H. Fitzgerald, and he mentioned being asked to go up by old friends or something like that. This is in his diary, which was discovered a few years ago, and there's an article on him in the Island magazine, which I did. Now, so that's they came from those bottom 4 counties. They farmed and they fished. In the early years, there was a trade started between Lot 7, well, actually all along that coast, I suppose, from West Point to North Cape, a distance of 30 miles or more, a trade with the Miramichi area in New Brunswick, which is pretty well straight across, you see. Easier to transport supplies right across 25 or 30 miles of water than it is to haul it along the coast of New Brunswick for 50 or 60 or 70 miles. You're still going to be taken up by water, and it was easy to run straight across, you see. And so that gave the settlement a start, and it gave these people, and this has been documented, it gave them a chance to buy things that the pioneers needed, sort of thing. So there was also a man I didn't mention, a man by the name of Tom Dunn. And Tom Dunn was, I'm not sure where he was from, I imagine from the bottom counties like the rest of them were. Very interesting man, told great stories, and this is where the Irish folklore comes in. But I'm going to stop at, we're talking about Tom Dunn.
Yeah.
And Tom Dunn was a tremendous storyteller. And he seemed to have brought the stories like they're sort of pieces of Irish mythology from Ireland with him. They're very much Irish. Like he used to tell stories about these tremendous feats of strength that he had performed when he was a kid or a young man in Ireland. Okay, and now these may not appear funny to modern people, but they were funny when he told them, sort of thing. The expressions are archaic, and they may not mean that much. But anyway, he told about one time he was playing football in front of the Queen, and it was a tremendously hard game, and he had made a tremendous run after the ball to kick it, and he couldn't get stopped, and he had jumped right over a coach and four. Now, that meant a coach and four horses. He had jumped right over the whole thing. And he would always set people up, and someone said to him, well, how did you ever make such a tremendous jump, Tom? And he said, well, the divil thanked me, I had 2 miles of a start. So, this was, the old people tell these stories as another story they tell was Tom used to tell about going to this wedding, and there was a desperate storm came up, a terrible storm, and he couldn't leave. Nobody could leave, and he had to spend the whole night in a room with 12 unmarried girls, 12 virgins is the way he put it. And he told somebody, he said 9 months later there was 11 sets of twins born in that part of the country. And somebody said, well, what happened to the 12th one, Tom? He said, she was barren. Wasn't him. No problem with Tom. No problem with Tom. Oh yeah, and then it's another really good one. A story he told about, this comes out of, as I say, Ireland. These stories are more Ireland than they are PEI. It just shows the sort of the strong traditions and connections they had. Tom told about having a match with the devil, with scythes, cutting with scythes, and how was it? Tom had beaten the devil. He beat the devil, and this is how he did it. He had harrow teeth. You know what harrows, if you grew up on a farm, you know the harrows.
Right.
In those days, of course, they were straight. Now they're spring tooth, but in those days, of course, the harrow teeth would be straight, just like little iron pegs.
Right.
So anyway, Tom he would be mowing along, and he would throw harrow teeth in front of the devil when he was mowing, see, and he'd hit his scythe dull his scythe, and he couldn't cut very well, and the devil would say, sharp, sharp, more sharpen, meaning, I guess, that Tom should stop and help him sharpen the scythe, and Tom would say, everybody's sharp for himself. So anyway, he had beaten the devil. Now, I don't know, I'm going to tell you this story, and I don't know whether Tom Dunn told this story or not. It's an old story up there. And it sounds like a story he might have told. You've heard of the fish called the haddock?
Yes.
Okay, well, this story concerns how the haddock got its name. I've never heard this story anywhere else but up there. There was a fish called Dick. This is what this fish was originally called. And one day this fish had a bet on with the devil. The devil said he could catch the fish, and the fish said no, because the fish was terribly fast. So fine, the devil rolled up his pant legs, and he got into the pond where the fish was, and the fish was swimming around. And, big God, the devil made a big grab for him and caught him. And he caught him right back of the fins on top. And he held him up, and he said, "Ha, Dick, I've got you." So this is a rather foolish story, but anyway, this is where the haddock gets its name. It's "Ha, Dick, I've got you." Now, if you look on the haddock, if you ever see a haddock, if you get a fisherman to identify a haddock, you will see the marks of the devil's thumb and fingers, one on each side where he caught that fish. There's two black sort of scratch marks there on the haddock, right down at the bottom of their fins, and that's how how they got there. The devil put his claws on them, and that's how they did it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's Tom Dunn, of course, was he was one of the early settlers up there in Lot 7. Most of these people lived on the north end of Lot 7. Now, you're down the road further, in the Mimnegash, Skinner's Pond area, Irish people moved in there, again from, I guess, the south of Ireland. Wexford, Cork, all along the shore there, Mimnegash, Skinner's Pond, Nail Pond, and the Tignish area. A lot of Irish moved in there, starting at I think it was Nail Pond, in 1811, which is earlier than the Irish in Lot 7, which was 1820. So, the songs, well, the songs themselves, I can't sing anymore for you today, unfortunately. I wish I could. I've got laryngitis. But if you should ever have occasion to get me when I'm not busy, when does the project end, by the way?
Next week.
Next week. See, I'm going to be tied up, Jeff, all next week.
Yeah.
But I intend to be alive again, next summer, in case you.
You plan to be around.
Yes, I plan to be around, and in that case, we can always tape some more. As a matter of the name of being a very, very good man. He was an elder in the church, and very hard working, sort of a big man with a great black, bushy beard. He did get down. He used to tell stories, exaggerate a bit. He did get down to Malpeque or Baltic one time. I'll tell this story because it's kind of funny. He told about going down to visit his cousins down in Baltic. Now, his cousins were blacksmiths. These Riley fellows who lived in Baltic. They were blacksmiths, and they were great, large men, terribly strong. He told about going down, and he said the first thing they did was they stumped him for body blows. Now, I don't know whether anybody in here has ever heard that expression before. It was a custom that young men, if you met a friend on the, a friend, mostly, if you met a friend on the road, or you were at a party, or you were fooling around, you would stump somebody for body blows. Now, what that meant was two fellows would stand up and hit one another in the chest as hard as they could, taking turns to see who could hit the hardest. It's an island expression. I've never heard it
I've never heard it only from like my uncles who remembered Uncle Dan telling the story. And I'm sure it was in current use 100 years ago to stump somebody for body blows. Well, he went down anyway, and these big cousins of his, they stumped him for body blows. And he was terribly afraid because they were awfully strong, and they had hit him an awful whack in the chest. He had just shook all over, apparently, but he was telling this to sort of illustrate how strong he was. Because then his turn had come, and he had hit this fella. They were in a blacksmith shop, and he had hit this fella, and sometimes you'll see in the cartoons, when a fella goes out through the wall, he leaves his form in the wall. Well, this is the way the guy had gone. Right out through the wall, leaving his form, right in the wall. So this is Uncle Dan's story, anyway, when they had stuck him with body blows. But he was a very good man. He really was a very good man. He never married. There was a girl that he was in love with, or at least this is the story I get. She was a school teacher there in the village, and Uncle Dan would have married her, but Uncle Dan's mother was a battle axe. As far as I can find out, no one was good enough for Dan. No one was good enough for him. And she effectively barred the marriage. And so he never married. And the girl laughed and so on. His mother was a McNeil. That's what she was. She was a McNeil. And she considered herself a great deal higher than sort of the local population. Anyway, so he grew up a bachelor, and when he got old, he would make a little song, sort of joking about his being a bachelor. And he did a song one time. It's called Uncle Dan. He put his own name to it. He said in the song, a young girl from up the road tips him off this particular day. She said there's a widow woman, and I didn't know the name, I can't remember. A widow woman who lived down the road was scheming to marry Uncle Dan, and this girl had come and told him this. The expression she used was the woman she had set her cap for him. Now, have you heard that expression? Set her cap for him. Well, anyway, she set her cap for him, and he better beware, because this woman had her eye on him, and so he made this song. He may have made the whole thing up, but it's a good little song anyway. Should turn around a bit. I never know where I'm going to have to. Oh, she minced around and waved her fan and set her cap for Uncle Dan. But a sly young maid got on the plan and broke the news to Uncle Dan. Said I'd surely like to see you wed, but not to her, for you're better dead. She's pulled the sod o'er one good man, so now be aware of her Uncle Dan. He answered with a cheerful laugh, this bird's too old to be fat with chaff. But I often met the likes of her and fended off with beak and spur. Now I thank you for revealing the plan, and I hope someday that you'll get a man. Be good to him, be kind and true, or perhaps the same will be said of you. And if he should die and you need another man, then clear the road for Uncle Dan. It's a good little song. I think he's, he wasn't a Larry Gorman. Larry Gorman, first of all, Uncle Dan would never write anything bad about anyone. And Larry Gorman would never write anything good about anyone. That's all I said yesterday. Uncle Dan wasn't like that at all. He was probably more in the the conventional sort of balladeer type. He tended to if there was a murder or a tragedy, but he made light little songs. He used to tell about how smart his dog was. He lived in a little house up top of a low hill near where I grew up. But anyway, he had this dog. The dog was terribly smart. He said the dog knew that he should have a wife. The dog knew that there was something missing in his house, and he knew. And he made up a song about his dog. I don't know the tune of it. My mother sings it, but I haven't really mastered the tune. It's sort of a funny tune. He told about all the things his dog would do. He said the dog was supposedly, a girl was going by, and the dog supposedly went out and tried to bring the girl in. What? He said, he keeps close watch on my chickens, pursues both the fox and the crows. One day he dragged home by the dress tail a maiden with cheeks like the rose. So anyway, he used to tell these stories. Very religious man, very good man. His sister had married and had died, and the father of these children was very, very sick for years. And Uncle Dan inherited a whole batch of children, which he raised by himself. This old, poor, old bachelor. No money, no food, a house that the wind would blow through, and yet he raised a whole flock of, well, they were basically orphans. And one day, my grandfather, Uncle Dan's nephew, was walking over to Uncle Dan's in the middle of the winter. And you'd have to know where Uncle Dan lived. As I say, it was on a hill, and it was the coldest spot in the whole village because there wasn't a tree handy. That's the first thing the old pioneers did. They cut down every tree that would possibly give them any shelter. I don't know why but they cut down. They didn't like trees, and they went overboard. And there were no trees handy. And anyway, he lived on the top of this hill, and there was 10 feet of snow on the ground. And Uncle Dan had a little spring. And that spring used to snow over until you had to go down 5 or 6 feet through the snow to get into the spring to get water for his cattle. He had a few old cows. And there he was, in freezing cold, and this old man down, and he was dipping the water out of the spring with a dipper and putting it up over the top into buckets so his cattle could drink. And that would, well, if you've ever watered cattle that way, you'll know what eternity is like. And there he was, and my grandfather walked along, and Uncle Dan was working away, and he looked up and he said, "Man of dear," which was his worst oath. "Man of dear," he said, "this spring is a great comfort." He meant it. He was thankful for everything, and he thought this was something the Lord had sent him that was of great comfort to him. Everything that he had, he was thankful for, as little as it was. And my uncles, who were just boys when he died, I suppose, one of my uncles told me, he said, Uncle Dan had this idea that no matter what happened, the Lord would take care of you. And he said, see, Uncle Dan people were always sick and dying in those days. An awful lot of sickness, an awful lot of tuberculosis in my part of the country, even in the 20s. I had two uncles, or he had two uncles, and that died with just in our house alone, sort of thing. And there were dozens of young people just cut down like that with TB. But Uncle Dan, if anybody got sick, Uncle Dan would go for miles as a sort of a comforter, and he would sit up. The thing was sitting up with these people, and he would sit up, and he would stay for days and maybe weeks on end. And my uncle told me, he said, Uncle Dan always thought that no matter what happened, he could go and the Lord would somehow take care of his own place. And he said he was absolutely right, because he said our mother always drove us over and made us take Uncle Dan's hay in and take care of his cattle. So the Lord did provide in that way. He never, you know, that's the way he was. In the 1880s, there was a great tragedy, or a great tragic murder took place. Another song we can't sing, but I'll sing it for you. This took place in Margate. Now, Margate is near. Have any of you been to Woodley?
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's near there. It was a tremendously sort of famous case. A young girl by the name of Mary Tuplin was murdered by, supposedly by her boyfriend, who shot her and took her body out to the river and sank it with stones. And he was eventually hanged, and it was a very celebrated murder trial in Charlottetown here. And one of the more grisly aspects of the whole thing was that up until a few years ago, they had the part of this girl's skull in the window of a local drugstore. No, it happened 100 years ago. And I don't know where they come up with this, the old courthouse or what, but it must have been one of the exhibits. Oh yes, lots of people. I'd like to be able to say I saw it. It was there when I was going to college, but I really never did see it. But it was, I know a dozen people who comment about it, you know. There's no question about it was there. Well, anyway, they hanged this fellow. He went to the gallows here in Charlottetown denying that he didn't. But, and there's been a play done about that, a very good play called The Final Act, which sort of leaves you up in the air too. I suspect, as much as I'd like to believe that he didn't do it, I think he did. I think maybe the girl was expecting a baby. Story I heard, and I think may have some truth in it, was that there was another girl who his family was trying to arrange a match with, so on and so forth. It's called Milman and Tuplin song, because his name was Milman. Come, pull down the curtains, look silently on, while I sing the Milman and the Tuplin song. It's a tale of grave sorrow and suffering great, of a crime that was committed at a place called Margate. On the 18th of June, on a calm summer's night, when the moon in the heavens shone a pale ray of light, young Mary walked out from her own cottage door, and little she thought she'd return there no more. Went to meet her young lover, and o'er her young spirit lay a deep ray of gloom, for she mourned for her brother just laid in his doom. Went to meet her young lover, who a few days before said he'd make all things right when they'd meet on that shore. But a crime he committed that will ne'er be forgot. In his hand a revolver, and the pair made a shot. Took her out to the river, sank her body deep down, and he prayed in his heart that she'd never be found. But the Lord, he looked down from his throne way on high, and he said, for this crime now, young Milman, you'll die. For my watchman this night I have stationed around, and when you're tried for murder, your guilt will be found. Young Milman was taken away His trial came on in 1888, and counsel for his client proved eloquence great. We give him great credit for being eloquent and bright, but 'tis a hard thing, you know, to make wrong appear right. It's hard to see one in his prime cast away, but his trial was just, and what more can we say? Only don't commit crimes and repent when too late, and think with a shudder on that night at Margate. That's that Noonan and Tupland song. I did put that on M-A-R-G-A-T. I don't think that's on the album. No, it isn't on the album. Again, it's a song that raises strong feelings in the Margate area. There are still, it happened. The village sort of went into a decline after that. My mother told me that when he got old, and you can imagine how bad things were in 33 in Prince County, or maybe you can't, things were very bad. It was a very poor area always, and it was very, very poor in 1933, and there were a lot more meal times than there were meals. And Uncle Dan, my mother told me that as he got older, he just got poorer. He was an old man. There was no welfare, social legislation at that time. And he had these young children growing up, and she said there were two things. First of all, he would never eat until the children ate. And secondly, he never sat down at the table without saying grace. Always thanked, gave thanks for what he had. And at the end, he had smoked all his life. He was totally addicted to tobacco. Smoked a pipe. And at the end, near the time before his death, he had to stop smoking because there was no money for tobacco. And he said he never missed it. But my mother said he was never right. He was never quite right again after he stopped smoking. His mind started to wander a bit, although he was pretty clear right to the end. And I talked to a man who went to the house the night he died. He died at home. And he told me, Uncle Dan Riley, and this was no connection with the family at all. He said, Uncle Dan Riley. He said he froze. It was in February, 33, very cold time. He said he froze and he starved. That's what happened to him. He was 83 years old. But he was quite an individual. The world, or at least the village, was certainly a better place for him having been in it. He left no mark. He left no children. All he left were 3 or 4 songs, which is maybe more than most of his songs. And those songs are still pretty much alive. As I say, I like the O'Halloran Road very, very much. It's a nice song. Interestingly enough, no, I wouldn't say. Although, there are a couple of tunes like the Uncle Dan tune that I have never run across anywhere else. And I suspect if anybody made their own tunes, Uncle Dan was the one. Now, most folk song makers didn't. Larry Gorman always borrowed his tunes from something else. And I think the O'Halloran Road is a borrowed tune from an old Irish tune. Now, that's something that one might remember, is that the Irish dominated that part of oral history. And you might get that down, Jeff, if you've got your tape recorder going. The Irish tended to dominate the folk songs. Like, even if I were a Scotsman writing folk songs 100 years ago, most of those songs went to Irish tunes. And there's a theory about why this is so. The Irish tended to be, they think, to channel their energies into the sort of the oral traditions, where the Scots were more academic types. All the notable writers on PEI, the people who wrote books and who made a name for themselves in academics, are Scots. Lucy Maud Montgomery, Sir Andrew MacPhail, 3 or 4 others. They're Scots because they tended to go that way. But if you go through the folk songs of PEI, you'd think that no one lived here but the Irish. Now, the French, of course, had their own tunes, and but I know of tunes or songs composed by Acadians, again to Irish tunes. To answer your question, I think some of them, I think Uncle Dan may have come up with some original tunes, but mostly he and the other song makers borrows it.
How did he get to be raising all these children again?
His sister, just a second. His sister, they weren't his. It wasn't his sister. It was his sister's son, whose wife had died, and all the family, of course, were gone. And so there was this nephew of Uncle Dan's who had a family, no one else to sort of help. So Uncle Dan took the nephew and the nephew's children. That's how it was. They were his grand-nephews, I guess, and nieces. They were poor, very poor children. That's what happened. I think that's why TB got such a terrible hold out there in some families. It was just malnourishment. What it was. Hard work, and people would get colds and get the flu, and if you weren't getting proper nourishment, and the TB germ was around, and it was in most of the old houses, then people would contract this disease and die. And that village was just sort of ridden with this. Well, I think that's all the Uncle Dan songs I can sing, and maybe all the Uncle Dan stories. Maybe a couple of other songs that I could sing before my throat was
This isn't laid back.
No, this would be the cousins were loyalists. Cousins' family were loyalists, or at least they came here from the U.S. at the time of the Revolution. On the other side, on my mother's side, there were Irish and Scots. Irish and Scots Protestant, actually, that's not surprising with the Scots, because they were usually Presbyterian. But Irish on the PEI tended to be Catholic. There are a few Irish Protestant families, and this family of Rileys, one of whom married A. McKay, my mother McKay, were Irish Protestants.
And they came over by ship.
Yes. Yes. They came, as near as I know, directly from, McKay's anyway, directly from Scotland. I think they came probably in 1773 or thereabouts. They're a fairly old family. They tell stories about walking from Malbec to North Cape to hunt walrus dead of winter because sea cows. Because they had nothing else to eat. And if it had been for the local Acadians, and maybe the Micmacs, there would have been a lot of these settlers not survived, because the Acadians had been here, and they had been here for 50 years, or yes, 50 years at that point, and they knew the country, and you either learned how to survive or you didn't last 50 years. That's the way it was. The most famous song from PEI is Peter Emberley. I think it is probably the most famous folk song. Peter Emberley. Now this song spread all over Eastern North America, by the way. You may have heard it, or you may not. It's been recorded by numerous individuals. Peter Emberley was born on the Dock Road, about 2 miles from where I grew up. And he left there, a young man, he left there in 1883 or 1882 after some row or argument with his father. He went to the lumber woods, the Miramichi, which is what all the young punks did. And he was killed over there. And I'd like to claim this song as an island song, but really it was made by a New Brunswicker, although Peter Emberley is an islander. And the song is sort of directed at PEI. Oh, my name is Peter Emberley, as you may understand. I was born on Prince Edward's Island, close by the ocean strand. In 1882, when the flowers were in brilliant hue, I left my native country, my fortune to pursue. I landed in New Brunswick, that lumbering country. I hired for to work in the lumber woods on the banks of the Miramichi. I hired for to work in the lumber woods where they cut the tall spruce down, and it was loading sleds while in the yards I received my deadly wound. Here's a due unto my father, 'twas him who sent me here. He treated me most cruelly, his treatment was severe. It is not right to oppress a boy, or to try to keep him down, for it will drive him from his home when he is far too young. Here's a due unto my dearest friend, I mean my mother dear. She raised a boy who fell as soon as he left her tender care. 'Tis little that my mother knew as she sang me a lullaby, what foreign countries I would roam, or what death I would die. Here's a due unto Prince Edward's Isle, fair island of the sea. No more I'll roam your flowery banks to enjoy the summer's breeze. No more I'll watch those gallant ships as they go drifting by, their flags a-flying in the wind far above their canvas high. Now there's one thing I do ask of you, and this I humbly crave, to get a holy Father for to bless my peaceful grave. Far from the city, a boy's town, where my moldering bones do lay, to await the coming judgment on the resurrection day. Peter Emberley. That's a pretty good song, too. I think it was written by a Brunswicker by the name of Wilmot. As near as I know, and it's very widely known, of course, the Lumberwoods. See, a lot of these songs, of course, people sang them in the Lumberwoods, and they were carried home from the Lumberwoods by the men who worked there. Right up until the 50s, as I mentioned yesterday, men still worked in those logging camps in Brunswick, and there was absolutely none of the basic sort of pleasures of life in the camps. There was no electricity and no radios, and those men entertained themselves. And if you were a good singer in the camp, you were lucky. Because my father worked in the woods, he's told me enough about it. So it wasn't much. It was pretty rough. But at night, if there was a guy who could sing, they would sort of conscript him, and even if he sang the songs over and over again. Any other questions?
To have such a touching song written about you going back to Peter Emily must have made a big impression on somebody.
Yeah.
As being very special.
Yeah. This is the interesting thing about some song makers who were very good. They would somehow, and Gorman did this once in a song that I didn't sing because my throat would hold up. But Gorman actually got inside a man's soul in one particular song, and I think the man who wrote Peter Emberley did the same thing. And that's the mark of a really good song. Almost, not everyone, but a lot of people can write funny little ditties and so on. But to get inside a man's soul and know what he thinks, Gorman did it once. Tremendous song.
I'd like to make a comment that a lot of what the pioneers of Canada have done has come out in the music, like the whaling and the logging. And,
sure. It does.
What courage it took.
Sure, it does. It comes out quite strongly in everyday music.
And I'm glad, yes,
They wrote of what they were doing. The interesting thing about PEI, and that sort of brings it to mind, is that PEI is very political. We're the most political province in Canada. Everybody's interested in politics, and there's no one on the fence. Everybody's either one side or the other. And I couldn't understand for years, if we were like this, why there weren't more political folk songs? Because people sing about what? Just as you were pointing out, they sing about their work and what they're doing, sort of thing. Why? But they're turning up. In the last 2 years, when I really started to collect, the political songs are there. Sometimes it's hard to get people to sing them because, of course, they don't want to be labeled. Yes, they don't want to be labeled as conservative or liberal or whatever. And but the songs are there. I've run across quite a few.
We have no uncommitted voters.
Oh, there doesn't seem to be any. Here's one that was written, which is very. This man is very clear whose side he's on. It's written in the late 50s. As I say, people were still writing these things, or early 60s, I guess. This was written by a man called Alex Shea, who was a very good songmaker and lived in Tignish. Was an alcoholic, along with everything else, but he was a good songmaker. Diefenbaker, he is defeated and is gone. Nevermore that he will sit upon the throne. Now that Pearson has the reins, he should exercise his brains, and they'll build the island causeway 9 miles long. I was well aware that the day would come when the Grits would get the Tories on the run, and they should have And they should have made them run long before they had begun, for they nearly had our country on the bum. Now, this is a reference to local politics. There's a man who ran up in First Prince, a Liberal, Prosper Arsenault. But he was a very small man, still lives up there near me, as a matter of fact. He's only with this high. And everybody, of course, called him Little Pross. And this is, he's putting in a pitch for Little Pross here. If you vote for Little Pross, tra-la-la, he'll find markets for your moss, tra-la-la. And we'll get a job for Shaw, we will put him baling straw, for he's ignorant to the law all along. Shaw, Premier. Yeah. Another political one. This was from the Bloomfield area, and written by a man who tried to stay on the fence because he was a local storekeeper. And it didn't do to take sides if you were the storekeeper, because you lost all the other side. I had an uncle who was the most partisan man. I still have him, as a matter of fact. He's not running a store anymore, and this may be why. He was a storekeeper, actually in Bloomfield. It's got nothing to do with this. He is the most partisan of partisans, and there are lots of them up there. I mean, you just take sides, and that's it. The other side is all bad, and your side is all good, and that's that. And my other uncle, who takes a more level view of this whole proceeding, told me one day, he said, it was just before an election, and the uncle who gets so worked up with these things, who ran the store, my other uncle had been into the store, and he was telling me, he said, you know, Vance is so worked up about the election now, I'm so mad, that when the Liberals come in, he won't sell anything to them. So that's really cutting your own throat. You're a storekeeper. And of course, your politics is well known up there. And people, even if, you know, I mean, you say, well, how did he know that these people were Liberals or Conservatives? Well, everybody knows that's how. You know, because everybody takes sides. This comes from the 30s. Now, I'll tell you the story on this. When the governments changed in the this was probably before the 1940s, there was a takeover period of some months, probably 2 or 3 months, and the defeated government during that period still had the reins of patronage, so that if there was a bridge to be built, I think it wasn't 3 months. It was a shorter period of time, but they always had this transition period to dispense patronage, you see, before the other guys took the reins of office. Well, what happened was in 35, I think this was written in 35, the Liberals went strong, quite strong. They won 30 seats to 0 for the Conservatives. So they
Was strong.
Yeah. The Conservatives had been in, and there was this bridge in Bloomfield that had to be fixed. And of course, this work was given to the local fellas. Well, the Conservatives plotted, and the deadline was up. It was up the day after this incident happened. So what they did, the local Conservative manipulators, was send a crew of men under cover of darkness the night before and did all the work on this bridge. The Liberals accused them of stealing the bridge. So basically, they stole the work on it. Well, they did. And they worked all night till 4 o'clock in the morning, and they got the money for it. See, the Liberals who were coming into power didn't get anything. This refers to local people who you don't know, but you get the picture. George Hammer, the night hawk, drove up in his car, went to see Dan MacDonald, the Conservative czar. About fixing that bridge, we'll do it tonight. To let the Grits do it, it wouldn't be right. Red Jack Sanders, like the monarch from Spain, once ruled the Grit roads, but never again. Some got their shovels, carts, axes, and picks, and went up to Chapels the bridge for to fix. About 11 p.m. the brigade made a start. Not a sound to be heard but the squeak of a cart. Up the road they did march in ones, twos, and threes, and they had a fine night with a nice little breeze. It was Fraser the boss who gave the command to pile up the rocks and to dig up the sand. They bent their backs to it and worked with their might, for they were determined to fix it that night. They worked through the night neath the light of the moon, and said to themselves, we'll be done pretty soon. They threw their last shovel at 4:45, and they laughed and said, won't the Liberals be sore? That morning the landlord of Bucktown, or Wolf Bucktown was a little sort of a annex to Bloomfield, and that's not its name, but that's what they called it for some strange reason. That morning the landlord of Bucktown awoke, and went out to the barn the old mare for to yoke. Down the Louis road he did come on the fly, but Regalant hailed him before he got by. He broke the sad news to Joe then and there. Joe stamped and he cursed and he pulled out his hair. When the member stepped down from his own office door and he heard the sad news, well, he felt pretty sore. See, the member had just been elected, the Liberal member, and he lived in Bloomfield, so this was done right under his nose. It's a terrible slap in the face. We hope that this town will brighten once more, and the Grits and the Tories, they won't be so sore, and that everything in the town will be well, for if things don't get better, they'll soon go to hell.